Now that we have our frost debuff, let's go ahead and create our frost attack emitter. As you remember, the frost attack emitter is the game object that sits at the tip of the player's antenna and controls the logic of the attack. I'm going to start by creating a new particle system. Again, I do this by going to the hierarchy window and selecting Create Particle System. I'm going to rename this Frost Attack. Now this particle emitter is actually going to be very similar to the particle system for the lightning attack. Therefore, I'm going to go to the boy game object, and then I'm going to expand Antenna and click Lightning Attack. I'm going to right click on its particle system component and select Copy Component. Now I'll go back to the Frost Attack game object, and on its particle system, I will right click and say Paste Component Values. We'll see immediately that the Frost Attack now looks exactly like the Lightning Attack. So now let's go through and make our changes. The first thing that's different is that the Frost Attack moves much slower, so I'm going to change the start speed from 0.75 to 0.2. I'm also going to increase the size from 0.21 to 0.38. I'm going to change its color to an icy blue. And I'm going to change the gravity from 0.17 to 0.04. The rest of these changes can be left exactly how they are. Now you'll notice that there should be other modules here, yet they're not listed in the particle effect window. That's because we pasted the values of this particle system while this window is open. Let's go ahead and force it to refresh by just clicking away and then clicking back. Now we can see all of the modules listed. I'm going to leave the emission and shape modules alone, and I'm going to come over to the color over lifetime. We obviously don't want this yellow color, and so what I'm going to do is change the yellow color to a deep blue color. We can leave that middle color the way it is. Then, in the color by speed module, again I'm going to change the yellow color to a blue color. I'll leave the rest of these alone, and the particle system on the Frost Attack emitter is complete. However, that's not all there is to creating our Frost Attack. The Frost Attack is actually going to have a few other things. The first thing we need to add is a child game object. I'm going to right click on Frost Attack in the hierarchy and select Create Empty. And I'm going to name this Frost Arc. The way this attack works is it needs to hit all of the enemies in front of it in an arc. Now we could do a lot of math to determine what enemies are close to the player and in what arc they're in, and if they're within range and within the angle of the arc, then do something to them. A much simpler method is just to use a collider. When the attack starts, turn the collider on and see what it hits. When the attack's done, turn the collider off. So I'm going to go ahead on this Frost Arc game object and I'm going to add a collider. I'm going to go to Add Component, Physics, Mesh Collider. The mesh I'm going to use for this collider can be picked by clicking the circle selector next to the mesh property. I'm going to choose the Arc Mesh. I'm also going to tell this mesh collider that it is convex, which will make it better at determining collisions. We also don't want this collider to physically push enemies away, we just want to know what enemies are within its bounds. So we're going to check Is Trigger. Now you'll notice that this arc is straight up and down. This is because our Frost Attack game object is already rotated upwards because it started off as a particle system. I'm going to go back to the Frost Attack parent game object and remove that rotation. Now on the Frost Arc, all I need to do is move the arc forward and center it so that it appears right in front of where the player will be attacking. The easiest way to do this is to put the Frost Attack on the player now and use that to center it. Therefore, I'm going to click on the Frost Attack game object in the hierarchy window and click and drag it onto the antenna game object of the player. I'm then going to right click on the transform of the Frost Attack game object and reset it. I can see that this arc is a little back and a little to the right of the player. So I obviously need to move it forward and to the left. I'm going to change the X position of this arc to be something about 0.5. I'm also going to move the arc forward to have a value of somewhere around 3.3. You'll notice that I'm putting the arc well in front of the player. This is so the arc doesn't accidentally hit the player's own collider and attempt to freeze it. That obviously would not be very good. This way, the arc and the player cannot collide with each other. Now, since we're relying on this collider and the collisions caused by this collider to tell us where the enemies are, we need to add a rigid body. Now, the player itself has a rigid body, however, that rigid body is on the boy game object, which is not where our attack script lives. Our attack script lives on this frost attack game object. Since the script is here, but the rigid body is up on the boy game object, they won't be able to detect the collisions from the frost arc mesh collider. So I'm going to add a rigid body to my frost attack game object. I'm going to do that by clicking Add Component, Physics, Rigid Body. Now I don't actually want this to behave like a rigid body, I just want the collisions. I don't actually need forces or any of that stuff. So I'm going to uncheck Use Gravity, and I'm going to check Is Kinematic, meaning the physics engine really isn't going to do anything with this rigid body, it's just going to tell me if I have collisions. The last thing I need to do is I need to add the script that's going to perform the logic of this attack. I'm going to do that by clicking Add Component, Scripts, Frost Attack. Now this Frost Attack just needs to know what is the Frost Debuff prefab. So I'm going to go to the VFX folder underneath my prefabs folder, locate the Frost Debuff prefab, and click and drag it onto that property. Now we can try this out. However, just like the lightning attack, until we have all pieces built, we're going to have some errors in the console window. Before I test it out, however, it's worth knowing that the player can really only have one attack turned on at a time, and generally the lightning attack starts turned on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my frost attack for the time being. It's also worth knowing that the player attack script still doesn't know about the frost attack. So I'm going to click on the boy game object, go down to the player attack script, and then click and drag the frost attack game object onto the frost attack property. Then I'm going to tell the player that they now have 2 attacks. I'm going to hit play, and then I'll hit the switch weapons button, which is the tab key, and I will see a couple things happen. I'll see a whole bunch of errors appear inside the console window. I'll also see some frost debuffs flashing there. And if I click, I'll see a few more, and I can see that we're also able to freeze our enemy. One thing that I just noticed that we need to do is I need to go back to the frost arc, and I need to turn the mesh collider off to start. We don't want to start with that mesh collider just appearing. Our script is going to handle turning that on. That was one of the reasons our initial frost debuff prefab popped into existence. Now it should only appear when I click the mouse. We still don't have our frost cone. That's the effect we're going to go ahead and create in the next video.